You inherit your grandfather's beautiful lakefront cabin, the same cabin he built with his own hands in 1952, where 3 generations of your family spent every summer, where you learned to fish and swim, and where your kids took their first steps on the wooden dock. Then, one morning, you drive up to find some random white family moving their furniture into your cabin. When you confront them, they call the police on you for trespassing on your own property. But here's the twist that's about to blow your mind. The woman who gave away your family's cabin. She doesn't just work for the HOA, she is the HOA, and she's been systematically stealing black-owned properties for years through a scam so elaborate it would make your head spin. Here's the kicker. She had no idea who she was messing with. This is the true story of how Marcus Thompson lost his family's legacy cabin to the most corrupt HOA president in Michigan history, and how he got his revenge by literally fencing her entire operation right out of existence. You're about to discover how one man's quest for justice exposed a multi-million-dollar real estate theft ring and brought down an empire built on stolen black family land. And it all started with a phone call that nobody saw coming. Marcus Thompson first saw his grandfather's lakefront cabin when he was 5 years old. It was 1983, and he still remembers the way the morning mist rose off Pine Lake, how the wooden dock creaked under his small feet, and the smell of his grandmother's blueberry pancakes drifting through the screen door. "This is our place, baby," his grandfather Samuel had told him, lifting Marcus onto his shoulders so he could see across the entire lake. "Your great-grandfather bought this land in 1948, when black folks weren't allowed to buy property anywhere else around here. Took him 5 years of saving every penny to afford it. Built this cabin with his own 2 hands in 1952. Marcus had spent every summer of his childhood at that cabin, learning to fish from the dock, swimming in the crystal clear water, helping his grandfather repair the roof and paint the shutters bright blue, the same color they'd been since 1952. It wasn't fancy, just a simple 2-bedroom log cabin, but it was theirs. Completely and legally theirs. When Samuel passed away in 2019, he left the cabin to Marcus with clear, simple instructions. Keep it in the family. Don't let anybody take what your great-grandfather built. Marcus had every intention of honoring that wish. At 41, he was a successful IT consultant in Detroit, divorced, with 2 teenage kids who loved their summers at the lake just as much as he had. The cabin needed some updates, new plumbing, electrical work, maybe a deck renovation. But Marcus was looking forward to the project. What he hadn't counted on was Pine Lake Community Association President Sharon Whitman. Sharon had been running the PLCA for 8 years, ever since she'd moved to the area from suburban Cleveland. She was the kind of woman who turned homeowners associations into personal kingdoms, controlling, manipulative, and absolutely convinced that her vision of the perfect community was the only one that mattered, and her vision definitely didn't include black families owning prime lakefront property. The first sign of trouble came in March 2020, just as the pandemic was shutting everything down. Marcus received a certified letter from the Pine Lake Community Association, claiming that his property taxes were in arrears and that the cabin would be subject to immediate seizure if payment wasn't made within 30 days. Marcus stared at the letter in confusion. His grandfather had owned the property outright. There was no mortgage, no liens, and the property taxes had been paid every year through an automatic payment system his grandfather had set up with the county tax office. He called the county tax assessor's office. "Mr. Thompson, yes, your property taxes are current. They've been automatically paid every year since 2010. I'm not sure why you'd receive a notice like that." Marcus called the Pine Lake Community Association office. "PLCA, this is Sharon speaking." "Hi, MS Whitman. This is Marcus Thompson. I own the cabin at 1247 Lakeshore Drive, and I received a letter about overdue property taxes. But I just spoke with the county and my taxes are current. There was a long pause. Mr. Thompson, are you Samuel Thompson's grandson? Yes, ma'am. Another pause, longer this time. Mr. Thompson, I'm going to need you to come in and discuss your property status in person. There are some complications regarding your ownership that need to be resolved. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. What kind of complications? It's better if we discuss this face to face. Can you come in tomorrow morning? Marcus took the day off work and drove the 2 hours from Detroit to Pine Lake. The PLCA office was located in a small strip mall between a hardware store and a coffee shop. Sharon Whitman was exactly what Marcus had expected. Mid-50s, bleached blonde hair, the kind of fake smile that didn't reach her eyes. Mr. Thompson, thank you for coming in. Please have a seat. Sharon spread a collection of documents across her desk with the theatrical flair of someone revealing a winning poker hand. I'm afraid there's been a significant problem with your property ownership. It appears your grandfather failed to properly register the cabin with the Pine Lake Community Association when the HOA was established in 2012. Marcus frowned. What does that mean? It means, legally speaking, your cabin is considered abandoned property. Under Michigan state law and our community bylaws, abandoned properties revert to the association after 7 years. But it's not abandoned. My grandfather lived there every summer until he died. I have the deed. I have the property tax records. Sharon's smile never wavered. I understand your confusion, Mr. Thompson, but having a deed doesn't automatically mean you have HOA membership. Your grandfather never paid the required association fees or filed the proper paperwork. As far as the PLCA is concerned, the property has been vacant and unmanaged since 2012. Marcus felt the room start to spin. That's impossible. My grandfather was meticulous about paperwork. He would have filed anything that was required. I'm sure he would have if he'd known about it. Unfortunately, sometimes these things slip through the cracks. Sharon leaned forward with mock sympathy. The good news is that we've found a buyer for the property who's willing to take it as is. The sale will cover all the back fees and penalties, and there might even be a small amount left over for you. A buyer? You're going to sell my family's cabin? It's not your cabin, Mr. Thompson. Not legally, not anymore. That's when Marcus realized this wasn't bureaucratic confusion. This was theft. Marcus left the PLCA office in a daze. He drove straight to the cabin, parking in the gravel driveway he'd been using since childhood, and sat on the front porch trying to process what Sharon Whitman had just told him. How could his family's property they'd owned for over 70 years, just be taken away? How could an HOA that didn't even exist when his grandfather bought the land suddenly have the power to seize it? Marcus pulled out his phone and called the best real estate attorney in Detroit. Marcus, I'm going to be straight with you. Attorney Janet Reynolds told him after reviewing all the documents. What they're doing is probably legal, but it's definitely unethical. Michigan's HOA laws are pretty favorable to associations, especially when it comes to collecting fees and penalties. But my grandfather owned this property outright for 67 years. How can they just take it? Because when the Pine Lake Community Association was established in 2012, all property owners were required to join and pay dues. If your grandfather didn't respond to their initial notices, and it sounds like he might not have received them or understood their importance, the property could be considered in violation. Marcus felt sick, so they can just steal it. They'd argue they're not stealing it. They'd say they're collecting on legitimate fees and penalties that have been accumulating for 8 years. With interest and legal fees, that amount could easily exceed the value of the property. What are my options? Janet was quiet for a moment. You can fight it in court. but it's going to be expensive and there's no guarantee you'll win. Or what? You can let them have it and move on with your life." Marcus hung up the phone and walked down to the dock where his grandfather had taught him to fish. He sat there until sunset, watching the water and thinking about 4 generations of family memories that were about to be erased by HOA bylaws and legal technicalities. That's when he made a decision that would change everything. He wasn't going to let them have it, not without a fight. But first, he needed to understand exactly what Sharon Whitman was really up to. Marcus spent the next 3 months doing something Sharon Whitman never expected: research. He started with the Pine Lake Community Association's public records. As a nonprofit organization, the PLCA was required to file annual reports with the state, maintain meeting minutes, and make their financial records available to property owners. What Marcus found made his blood run cold. Since Sharon Whitman became president in 2012, the PLCA had seized 17 properties around Pine Lake. 17, all for unpaid fees and violations, and every single one of those properties had been owned by Black, Latino, or elderly white families. The pattern was always the same. The association would claim the property owner had failed to register properly or pay required fees. They'd assess massive penalties and interest charges. When the owners couldn't pay, the properties would be declared abandoned and sold to qualified buyers. And who were these qualified buyers? Marcus did some digging and discovered that 12 of the 17 properties had been purchased by Whitman Family Properties LLC, company owned by Sharon's husband, Robert Whitman. But it got worse. Marcus discovered that Sharon had been systematically targeting families she deemed undesirable for the Pine Lake community. Black families who'd owned property for decades suddenly found themselves facing violation notices for things like inappropriate landscaping and non-conforming architectural features. Latino families were cited for excessive noise during family gatherings. Elderly residents on fixed incomes were hit with special assessments they couldn't afford. When these families tried to fight back, they discovered that Sharon had stacked the PLCA board with her friends and neighbors. Appeals were routinely denied. Legal challenges were met with even more fees and penalties. It was a systematic theft operation disguised as HOA management. But Marcus's research revealed something else. Something that was about to turn Sharon Whitman's world upside down. 3 of the properties she'd seized, including Marcus's family cabin, weren't technically part of the Pine Lake Community Association's jurisdiction. They'd been grandfathered in when the HOA was established, which meant the association had no legal authority over them whatsoever. Sharon Whitman hadn't just stolen his family's property, she'd stolen it illegally. Marcus smiled for the first time in months. He had her, but before he made his move, he wanted to see exactly how far Sharon's arrogance would take her. On a sunny Saturday morning in June, Marcus drove to Pine Lake to check on the cabin. What he found in his driveway made him question whether he was losing his mind. There was a U-Haul truck parked next to the cabin. A white family, mother, father, 2 young kids, were carrying boxes and furniture through the front door. His front door, Marcus parked behind the U-Haul and approached the family. "Excuse me," he called out. "I think there's been some mistake. This is my family's cabin." The man, all blonde, wearing a polo shirt and khaki shorts that screamed suburban dad, looked up from the box he was carrying. "No mistake," he said curtly. "We bought this place last month. Fair and square. Bought it from who? The Homeowners Association. Look, I don't know what your deal is, but we have all the paperwork. This is our property now." The man's wife appeared in the doorway, holding their toddler. When she saw Marcus, her expression immediately shifted to suspicion and fear. "Brad, who is this? Says he thinks this is his cabin." Brad replied, setting down his box and crossing his arms. "I think he's confused about which property is which." Marcus felt that familiar tingle of recognition, the same tone he'd heard his whole life from white people who assumed he was lying, confused, or simply didn't belong. "Ma'am, I'm not confused. My family has owned this cabin since 1952. I have the deed, the property tax records, and—" "That's impossible," the woman interrupted. "Sharon told us this property had been abandoned for years. She said the previous owners just walked away. Sharon Whitman told you that." "That's right, and if you don't leave immediately, I'm calling the police." Marcus felt something snap inside him. These people, these strangers, were standing in his grandfather's cabin, threatening to call the police on him for trespassing on his own family property. "Go ahead and call them," Marcus said calmly. "I'll wait." Brad pulled out his phone and dialed 911. "Yes, I need police at 1247 Lakeshore Drive. There's a black male here claiming he owns our property and refusing to leave. He's being threatening and aggressive." Marcus closed his eyes and counted to 10. When he opened them, the woman was recording him with her phone. "I'm getting evidence," she announced, "in case you try to break in later." That's when Marcus made the decision that would change everything. Instead of arguing with these people, who were, he realized, as much victims of Sharon Whitman's scam as he was going to end this once and for all. But not the way anyone expected. While they waited for the police to arrive, Marcus did something that surprised everyone. He called Sharon Whitman. "Sharon, this is Marcus Thompson. I'm standing outside my family's cabin, and there are people moving into it claiming they bought it from you. Mr. Thompson?" Sharon's voice was syrupy sweet. "I explained this to you months ago. That property reverted to the association. It's been legally sold to the Hendersons." "That's correct. Brad and Jennifer Henderson. Lovely family. They're going to be wonderful additions to our community." Marcus looked at Brad Henderson, who was pacing nervously while waiting for the police, periodically glaring at Marcus like he was some kind of dangerous intruder. "Sharon, I want to ask you something directly. Are you sure, absolutely, completely sure, that you have the legal authority to sell this property?" There was a pause. "Of course I'm sure. Mr. Thompson, if you continue to harass our new residents, I'll have no choice but to pursue legal action against you." "I understand. Thank you for clarifying your position." Marcus hung up and turned to Brad Henderson. "Mr. Henderson, I need you to understand something. Sharon Whitman just committed a federal crime by selling you this property. She had no legal authority to sell it, and in about 6 months, you're going to lose everything you've invested here." Brad's face flushed red. "You're lying. Sharon showed us all the paperwork." "I'm sure she did. But here's what she didn't tell you. This property was never actually part of the Pine Lake Community Association's jurisdiction. It was grandfathered in when the HOA was established. She can't legally seize it, and she definitely can't legally sell it." Jennifer Henderson stepped forward. "That's impossible. We did our research. We hired a lawyer." "Did your lawyer actually verify the HOA authority over this specific property? Or did they just review the sale documents Sharon provided?" The look on Jennifer's face told Marcus everything he needed to know. "Oh God," she whispered. "Brad, what if he's right?" That's when the police arrived. Officer Tom Martinez stepped out of his patrol car and immediately recognized Marcus from his previous visits to the property. "Marcus, what's going on here?" "Hey, Tom, these folks think they bought my grandfather's cabin from the HOA. I'm trying to explain to them that Sharon Whitman doesn't have the authority to sell it." Tom looked confused. "She sold your cabin. How can she do that?" Brad Henderson stepped forward aggressively. "Officer, this man is trespassing on our property. We have the deed and all the legal paperwork. I want him arrested." Tom looked at the deed Brad handed him, then at Marcus. "Marcus, you got your paperwork with you." Marcus pulled out the original deed from 1948, the property tax records showing continuous payment through 2021. and a letter from the county tax assessor confirming the property's ownership status. Tom studied both sets of documents for several minutes. "Mr. Henderson," he said finally, "I think you might want to call your lawyer, like right now." What happened next became local legend. While Officer Martinez sorted out the immediate trespassing issue, ultimately determining that both parties had legitimate claims that needed to be resolved in court, Marcus excused himself to make a phone call. But he wasn't calling his lawyer. He was calling his cousin Jerome, who happened to be a civil rights attorney specializing in housing discrimination cases. "Jerome, I need you to drop everything and get up here. I found something that's going to blow your mind. Marcus, I'm in the middle of. They've been systematically stealing black-owned properties for 8 years. I'm talking about a massive civil rights violation involving dozens of families and millions of dollars in stolen real estate." Jerome was quiet for a moment. "How massive? Federal crime massive? Class action lawsuit massive? Front page of the Washington Post massive? I'll be there in 3 hours." But Marcus wasn't done making phone calls. He called the FBI Detroit field office and asked to speak to someone in the Civil Rights Division. He called the Michigan Attorney General's office and filed a formal complaint. He called the IRS and reported suspected tax fraud by a nonprofit organization. And then he called Channel 7 News in Grand Rapids and told them he had evidence of the biggest real estate fraud in West Michigan history. By sunset, Marcus's quiet lake front property looked like a crime scene. FBI agents were interviewing the Henderson family. News vans were lined up on Lakeshore Drive. Sharon Whitman's phone was ringing nonstop with calls from reporters, federal agents, and very angry lawyers. But Marcus was just getting started. While federal investigators spent the next 6 weeks unraveling Sharon Whitman's 8-year theft operation, Marcus Thompson quietly implemented the most elegant revenge plan in HOA history. He discovered that Sharon had made one crucial mistake in her property seizure scheme. She'd been so focused on stealing individual properties that she'd never bothered to properly research the legal boundaries of the Pine Lake Community Association's actual jurisdiction. As it turned out, 17 properties that Sharon claimed were subject to HOA authority were actually grandfathered properties that predated the association. That meant not only had she illegally seized those properties, but she'd been collecting fees and assessments from families for land the HOA never had any legal claim to in the first place. But Marcus's research uncovered something even more interesting. The Pine Lake Community Association's office, the building Sharon had been using as her headquarters for 8 years, was located on one of those grandfathered properties, a property that had been stolen from an elderly black woman named Dorothy Williams in 2015. Dorothy had died 3 years ago, but she'd left the property to her nephew in Chicago, a nephew who'd never been contacted about his inheritance because Sharon had buried the estate notification in a pile of unpaid fee paperwork. Marcus found Dorothy's nephew, Michael Williams, and explained the situation. "You're telling me my aunt's property has been stolen, and the people who stole it have been using it as their office to steal more properties?" "That's exactly what I'm telling you, and as the legal owner of that property, you have the right to evict them immediately." Michael was quiet for a moment. "What do you need me to do?" "Give me written authorization to act on your behalf, then sit back and watch." 3 days later, Marcus showed up at the Pine Lake Community Association office with a court order, a locksmith, and a crew of fence installers. Sharon Whitman arrived at her office that morning to find the entire building surrounded by an 8-foot chain link fence with no trespassing private property, signs every 10 feet. Marcus was sitting in a lawn chair just outside the fence, drinking coffee and reading the newspaper. "What the hell is this?" Sharon screamed. Marcus looked up from his paper. "Good morning, Sharon. This is a property rights enforcement action on behalf of the legal owner of this land, Michael Williams. This is the HOA office. You can't just fence us out." "Actually, I can," See, this building is located on property you stole from Dorothy Williams in 2015. Her nephew Mike is the legal heir, and he's decided he doesn't want you on his land anymore. Sharon's face went through several color changes. That's impossible. This property has been properly seized for unpaid fees. Marcus smiled. Just like my grandfather's cabin was properly seized. Funny thing about that, Sharon. It turns out 17 of the properties you seized were never actually subject to HOA authority in the first place, which means you've been running a criminal enterprise for 8 years. You can't do this. I'll call the police. Go ahead. I've got all the paperwork right here. Marcus held up a thick folder. Legal ownership documents, eviction notice, court order. Everything's completely legal. Sharon pulled out her phone and dialed 911. Yes, I need police at the Pine Lake Community Association office. Someone has illegally fenced off our building and is preventing us from accessing our property. 20 minutes later, Officer Martinez arrived for the second time in a month to sort out a property dispute involving Marcus Thompson. Let me guess, Tom said as he got out of his patrol car. Sharon tried to steal someone else's property. Marcus grinned. This time it was Dorothy Williams' place. Sharon's been using stolen land as her headquarters to steal more land. Tom looked at Sharon, who was red-faced and furious, then at the fence, then at Marcus's paperwork. Ma'am, do you have documentation proving the HOA legal ownership of this property? Sharon sputtered for several seconds before managing, Of course I do. It's all in my files, in the office, that I can't get to because of this illegal fence. Mr. Thompson, you got your ownership documents? Marcus handed Tom the folder, which included Dorothy Williams' original deed, her death certificate, probate court documents naming Michael Williams as heir, and Michael's written authorization for Marcus to act on his behalf. Tom spent 10 minutes reviewing everything. Ma'am, he said finally, you're going to need to find somewhere else to conduct your business. This property belongs to Mr. Williams, and he has the legal right to exclude you from it. Sharon's mouth fell open. You can't be serious, dead serious, and ma'am, given everything that's been in the news lately about the FBI investigation, I'd suggest you hire a very good lawyer, like today. As Sharon stormed off to her car, Marcus called out to her, Sharon, don't forget, you still owe the Henderson family a full refund for my grandfather's cabin, plus interest, plus damages. My lawyer says that's about $200,000 all told. Sharon's car door slam could be heard across the lake. 6 months later, Sharon Whitman sat in federal court facing 17 counts of mail fraud, wire fraud, civil rights violations, and racketeering under the RICO Act. The trial became a media sensation, not just because of the scope of Sharon's crimes, but because of the incredible story of how Marcus Thompson had systematically dismantled her entire operation. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Federal Prosecutor Amanda Chen said in her opening statement, this case is about power, greed, and the systematic theft of property from families who had the audacity to be Black, Latino, or elderly in Sharon Whitman's vision of the perfect community. The evidence was overwhelming. FBI forensic accountants had traced over $2 million in stolen property through Sharon's scheme. They'd found emails where Sharon explicitly discussed targeting undesirable families for property seizure. They'd uncovered fake documents, forged notices, and a paper trail of fraud spanning 8 years. But the most damning evidence came from Sharon's own recorded phone calls. During the investigation, Marcus had worked with federal agents to record several conversations with Sharon where she openly admitted to seizing properties from families she considered problematic for the community. The Thompson property is prime lake, front real estate, Sharon could be heard saying on one recording, it's been wasted on that family for decades. The Hendersons will actually maintain it properly and contribute positively to our community values. When asked what she meant by community values, Sharon's response was captured clearly on tape. Look, I'm not racist, but certain types of families just don't fit with the Pine Lake lifestyle. We have standards here. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Sharon Whitman was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison and ordered to pay $8 million in restitution to the families she'd victimized, but the legal consequences were just the beginning. The civil rights lawsuit that followed made national headlines and legal history. Marcus Thompson v. Pine Lake Community Association became the largest housing discrimination settlement in Michigan history. $847 million awarded to the 43 families who'd been targeted by Sharon's scheme. But more important than the money was what happened to the community itself. The Pine Lake Community Association was dissolved entirely. In its place, the families who'd had their properties stolen formed a new, truly democratic community organization focused on preserving the lake's natural beauty while respecting the rights and dignity of all residents. Marcus got his grandfather's cabin back, of course, but he also became the unlikely spokesperson for HOA reform across the country. The problem wasn't just Sharon Whitman. He told Congress during hearings on HOA oversight and regulation. The problem was a system that gave one person unchecked power over other people's lives and property. That system is broken and it needs to be fixed. Marcus's testimony led to the passage of the Homeowner Protection Act, which requires HOA boards to have independent oversight, limits their ability to seize properties, and creates federal protections for property owners facing discrimination. But perhaps the most satisfying part of the whole story was what happened to Brad and Jennifer Henderson. 6 months after the trial, Marcus received an unexpected visitor at his grandfather's cabin. Brad Henderson stood on the front porch, looking older and more tired than Marcus remembered. "Mr. Thompson, I wanted to apologize for everything." Marcus invited him in and made coffee while Brad explained what had happened to his family. "We lost everything," Brad said quietly. "The cabin, our down payment, our legal fees trying to fight the federal case. Jennifer and I almost got divorced over it. The kids had to change schools because we couldn't afford the house payments anymore." He paused, staring out at the lake. "But you know what? It was the best thing that ever happened to us." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "I mean it. We were so caught up in having the perfect lifestyle, the perfect community, that we never stopped to think about who was getting hurt by our definition of perfect. When Sharon told us that cabin had been abandoned, we never asked why. We just assumed she was telling the truth. Because it was convenient for us." Brad looked directly at Marcus. "I was racist, Mr. Thompson. I didn't think I was, but I was. The way I talked to you that first day, the assumptions I made, the fact that I automatically believed Sharon over you, that was racism, and I'm sorry." Marcus nodded. "Apology accepted, Brad. What are you and Jennifer doing now?" "We moved back to Grand Rapids. Jennifer's working as a paralegal for a civil rights law firm. Ironically, the same firm that represented some of the families Sharon victimized, and I'm working for a nonprofit that helps families navigate predatory HOA practices." Brad smiled for the first time since he'd arrived. "We're not rich anymore. We don't have the lake house or the perfect suburban lifestyle, but we're happier. We're doing work that matters, and our kids are learning about justice and fairness instead of just privilege and entitlement." As Brad was leaving, he turned back to Marcus. "Mr. Thompson, that fence you put up around Sharon's office, that was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Not because it was revenge, but because it was justice. It was someone finally standing up and saying enough." Marcus smiled. "Sometimes the fence isn't about keeping people out, Brad. Sometimes it's about protecting what should never have been taken in the first place." 5 years later, Marcus Thompson's grandfather's cabin has become something Samuel Thompson never could have imagined. A symbol of resistance against systemic racism and a gathering place for families fighting HOA discrimination across the country. Every summer, Marcus hosts the Pine Lake Justice Retreat, week-long event where families share their stories, lawyers provide pro bono legal advice, and community organizers teach people how to fight back against discriminatory housing practices. The old Pine Lake Community Association office building. It's now the Dorothy Williams Community Center, named after the elderly woman whose stolen property became Sharon Whitman's headquarters. It provides free legal services to families facing housing discrimination and offers educational programs about property rights and community organizing. Sharon Whitman is currently serving her sentence at the federal prison camp in Alderson, West Virginia. She'll be eligible for parole in 2029. The 17 families who lost their properties have all had them restored, with full compensation for improvements made during the theft period. Most have chosen to stay and help build the kind of inclusive community that Sharon Whitman fought so hard to prevent. And Marcus, he still spends every summer at his grandfather's cabin, teaching his own children to fish from the same dock where Samuel taught him 70 years ago. But now there's something new on the property, a small plaque next to the front door that reads, "This cabin was built in 1952 by Samuel Thompson, stolen in 2020 by HOA fraud, and reclaimed in 2021 by community action. Property rights are civil rights. Justice is possible." Marcus Thompson continues his work as an IT consultant while serving as a national advocate for HOA reform. His story has been featured in documentaries, academic studies, and policy reform initiatives across the country. He still summers at his grandfather's cabin with his children, who are now passionate advocates for housing justice. Sharon Whitman remains in federal prison, where she's reportedly working in the prison library and has expressed interest in studying law, though she's banned from ever working in property management or HOA administration again. Brad and Jennifer Henderson have become unexpected allies in the fight against housing discrimination. Their nonprofit has helped over 200 families navigate predatory HOA practices, and they speak regularly at conferences about recognizing and confronting implicit bias in housing decisions. The Pine Lake community has become a model for inclusive lakefront living, with property values actually increasing as the area gained national recognition for its commitment to diversity and justice. The community now hosts an annual Justice on the Lake festival that draws visitors from across the Midwest. Officer Tom Martinez was promoted to detective and now specializes in white-collar crime investigations. He credits the Pine Lake case with teaching him to look beyond surface-level disputes to identify systematic fraud patterns. Dorothy Williams Community Center has expanded to include a legal clinic, community garden, and after-school programs. It's funded entirely by donations and volunteer work from community members who believe that justice should be accessible to everyone. Michael Williams, Dorothy's nephew, moved from Chicago to Pine Lake and now manages the community center named after his aunt. He says Dorothy would be proud that her stolen property is now helping other families fight back against discrimination. And the fence that started it all, it's still there, surrounding what was once Sharon Whitman's Office of Operations. But now it protects a community garden where families of all backgrounds grow vegetables together, and children play without fear of being told they don't belong. Marcus likes to say that sometimes the best fences aren't the ones that keep people out. They're the ones that protect what matters most from people who would take it away. This story went viral because it gives us something we desperately crave. Proof that systematic injustice can be exposed, that the powerful can be held accountable, and that one person's courage can change an entire system. But the real power isn't in the viral moment when Marcus fenced out Sharon's office, though that was pretty satisfying. It's in what happened next: the systematic investigation, the federal prosecution, the community healing, the policy changes that will protect other families from the same abuse. Marcus Thompson didn't just get his cabin back. He dismantled a criminal enterprise, changed federal law, and created a template for how communities can fight back against systematic discrimination. Sharon Whitman thought she could steal from black families with impunity because the system was designed to protect people like her and exploit people like them. She was right about the system, but she underestimated the power of one person who refused to accept that the system was more important than justice. The fence around Sharon's office wasn't just revenge. It was a statement. You took what didn't belong to you. Now you're locked out of the power you abused. Justice isn't just about punishment. It's about making sure it can never happen again. That's the kind of justice that goes viral for all the right reasons. Drop if you believe property rights are civil rights. Share this if HOA corruption has affected your family. Comment. What would you have done in Marcus's position? Fight in court or fence them out? Have you ever dealt with HOA abuse or discrimination? Share your story.